Sonic Colors, also known as Sonic Colors in the UK, was the first of 3 Sonic games to launch exclusively on Nintendo systems, releasing in 2010 for the Nintendo Wii. It was met with generally positive reception at launch, and remains one of the highest rated mainline Sonic games to this day. When it comes to the Sonic fanbase though, Sonic Colors has lately been the subject of heavy retrospective criticism, with many blaming it for the problems that the franchise has been facing in modern times. What didn't help was Sega's failed remaster of the game Sonic Colors Ultimate, which has quickly become infamous for being an even worse port than Sonic Adventure DX, which, if you don't know, is saying a lot. But how does the original game hold up? Well, that's what I hope to find out in this video. Before we get into it, I want to take this moment to celebrate that I don't have to apologize for footage quality this time. Thanks to the Dolphin emulator, I was able to get the original game running in 1080p 60fps for your viewing pleasure, and future Sonic games should be even easier since they all have Steam ports. With that in mind, and without further ado, this is my review of Sonic Colors. Like Sonic Unleashed, Sonic Colors opens with a fun CGI intro that shows the story and some of the gameplay mechanics you're about to get yourself into. Unlike Unleashed though, this one lacks any spoken dialogue, with the only audio being the main theme, Reach for the Stars, playing at full blast, and honestly, it's great. Enjoy it while you can though, because the cutscenes only go downhill from here. We might as well get this out of the way before we get into the good stuff. The story is easily the worst part of Sonic Colors. Don't get me wrong, the concept is pretty neat. Eggman has built a massive amusement park in outer space as a front for an operation to harness the energy of these aliens, called Wisps, and use it to brainwash the entire world. Sonic and Tails break into the park and set out to stop him. It's a really creative idea, and we'll get more into what it does well in due time, but right now we need to talk about the writing. While previous Sonic games were written and translated in-house at Sega, Sonic Colors handed the writing over to Ken Pontac and Warren Graff, who are probably best known for Happy Tree Friends. Now, I've never watched Happy Tree Friends, but if the writing in that show is anything like how it is in Sonic Colors, I think I'm going to keep it that way. The dialogue here is clearly intended to be self-aware, but it falls flat on its face on nearly every turn. The humor boils down to a cluster truck of tired comedic tropes, one of the most common being, character says or does thing, other character points out how silly that thing is or sounds, first character agrees, end joke. But even more often, the dialogue delves into outright corny territory with none of that self-awareness present whatsoever. The Baldy McNosehair scene has become infamous for this very reason.
It seems an evil man, and you might know him, who they call Baldy Nosehair.
Baldy Nosehair? That's the best thing I've heard all day. I gotta remember that one.
Hey, where are you going?
To find Baldy McNosehair, of course. I'm totally calling him McNosehair.
Another big problem with the writing in Sonic Colors is how it depicts already established characters. It's pretty well known at this point that Pontac and Graff aren't exactly Sonic fans and hardly did any research on the series before being brought on for Sonic Colors, and oh boy does it show. Sonic, while not outright malicious, is kind of a jerk in this game, often taking credit for things Tails accomplishes and making fun of the Wisps in their time of peril. While he ultimately saves the day at the end like any other game, this depiction of Sonic is just annoying to suffer through. Tails hasn't been hit nearly as bad, but once again, since Sonic 06 failed, Sonic Team was scared to even touch the idea of other playable characters besides Sonic, so Tails is once again relegated to providing intel and presumably helping Sonic with transportation to the amusement park. I'll at least give the writers credit for giving Tails something to do, but it's still not any better than Unleashed. The only character that's been largely untouched by this flanderization is Dr. Eggman, though the desperate attempts at self-referential comedy still seep into his dialogue, and it's pretty painful to watch when it happens.
I'll harness their hyper-go-on power, and then nothing will stop me. I know I say that every time, but this time, really, nothing will stop me.
Boss?
What? Sonic!
Who you calling nothing?
So we're off to a pretty bad start. The story and writing don't stack up to the well-balanced story of Sonic Unleashed. But thankfully, things get quite a bit better from here, so next let's talk about presentation. Sonic Colors is an amazing looking game for the Wii, sporting a scaled down version of the Hedgehog engine that still manages some decent models, baked in lighting, and post-processing effects such as bloom. While the game only runs at 30 FPS on original hardware, it's at least a consistent 30 FPS unlike Unleashed, which makes all the difference in the world when it comes to the enjoyability of these games. Something that Unleashed did right was its environment design, and this carries over into Colors. The story, writing aside, sets up a lot of potential for level ideas, and the designers certainly took advantage of of this. From the breathtaking views in Tropical Resort to the beautiful meadows overrun by Eggman's machinery and Planet Wisp, the environments here are consistently pleasing to the eyes, and that's doubly impressive considering the limitations of the Wii. And once again, we have a magnificent soundtrack to accompany these creative stages. The variety of Unleashed, combined with the contemporary sound that composer Tomoya Otani was beginning to introduce in this era, not only passes the bar for a quality Sonic soundtrack, but also gives Sonic Colors a distinct flavor. With all this said, as always, I have my gripes. My first complaint may seem minor, but it is something that would be carried over into future entries, so I feel it demands at least some attention, and that's the animation. The in-game animations are mostly solid, seeing as they're directly ripped from Unleashed, but the cutscenes are pretty consistently meh. The way the characters move feels much stiffer than Unleashed, which had a good understanding of the 12 principles of animation. Meanwhile, Sonic Colors feels like it's doing the bare minimum, especially with facial animation, where the characters tend to only emote with their mouths and eyelids and not their eyebrows, sucking a lot of life out of otherwise expressive character designs. Side note, for some reason the cutscenes in this game are pre-rendered video files, and I really don't understand why. They still use the in-game models and lighting engine, and storing the raw animation itself would have taken much less space on the disc, so yeah, I don't know, just thought it was weird, and a bit of a bummer when playing the game on Dolphin. And now I have to talk about the voice acting. Sonic Colors replaces Jason Griffith with Roger Craig Smith as the voice of Sonic. As for why, my best guess is they wanted a fresh new direction to take the series, and with that came the idea of replacing the main character's voice. Whatever the actual reason may be, Roger ended up becoming a mainstay, still voicing the character in video games to this day. And listen, I understand many people have warmed up to his take on the character, and if you're one of those people, good on you, I'm glad you enjoy it. I am not one of those people. To get one thing straight first, no, I don't hate Roger Craig Smith. In fact, I actually really like his performances in other media, most notably Regular Show, where he made a lot of cameos and even voiced a main character for a while. He's a talented voice actor, and I have nothing but respect for the guy. But I don't think he was the right choice for Sonic the Hedgehog. If Ryan Drummond was to Sonic what Tom Kenny was for Spyro, Roger is like Carlos Alazraqui. His voice for the character, at least in Sonic Colors, tends to come off as bratty and annoying, talking more through his nose than his mouth.
When I was running around trashing robots, I saw a map that had a couple of interesting places. I think I'll go check them out. And maybe save some aliens.
I honestly don't think he's trying to sound grating. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's attempting to emulate how previous voice actors portrayed the character. The thing is, there's a key difference between those guys and Roger, and that's vocal range. When I hear Ryan in Sonic Heroes or Jason in Sonic Unleashed, I don't feel like I'm listening to some guy trying to sound like Sonic, I feel like I'm hearing Sonic speak in his own voice. But when I hear Roger as Sonic, that's all I can think of, even in recent games, and this guy's been voicing him for over a decade at this point. Now, with all of this said, I want to make it clear that I don't blame Roger for this rendition of Sonic's voice. I know better than that. However, I also see a lot of people blaming the voice directors for how the character speaks, and I feel like that's just as wrong. It's neither the actor's fault nor the director's. Rather, it's the fault of the casting director for picking Roger in the first place. Yell at me in the comments all you want, but there's a reason Samuel L. Jackson is Nick Fury and not Black Widow, and I feel a similar way about Roger Craig Smith as Sonic the Hedgehog. I swear I like this game. Mike Pollock is amazing as usual, yada yada yada, let's move on. I had my fair share of grievances with the day stages in Sonic Unleashed. The handling was slippery, the moveset felt unpolished, the level design had a lot of annoying moments, and of course the boost completely replaced Sonic's most iconic move. Despite that, this gameplay style did have potential, and Sonic Colors was the game to prove that. Before we get into it, I'd like to note that I won't be comparing this gameplay style to my three Sonic staples. The reason for this is very simple. It performs exactly the same as Sonic Unleashed did. So if you really want to know my thoughts on how well it fits the criteria of a Sonic gameplay style, go watch my Unleashed review and come back here when you're done. As for the rest of you, let's continue. Sonic Colors is functionally similar to the day stages in Unleashed, but makes various tweaks, big and small, both to polish up the existing formula and to accommodate the Wii Remote, which has significantly less buttons than its 7th generation contemporaries. To start, Sonic Colors massively improves Sonic's handling, and that's made crystal clear from the get-go. While he doesn't have the refined control of the adventure games, i.e. you're more so steering Sonic than controlling him, the turning is much tighter and Sonic doesn't slip around nearly as much as he did in Unleashed. Alongside this are some seemingly minor changes to his moveset that make a huge difference in practice, such as the double jump, which makes the platforming much easier. The air dash is still mapped to the boost button, but the homing attack is back to being being the same as the jump button, as it rightfully should be, so you're much less likely to accidentally boost this time around. But changes to the moveset will only get you so far, and that's where the level design comes in. Thankfully, this is also drastically improved for the grand majority of stages, albeit with some compromises. Sonic Colors focuses less on 3D platforming and more on straight corridors and 2D platforming. This is something that people often criticize the game for, but personally, I think this was the best decision they could have made for this gameplay style. The thing about Boost Sonic is that he's not very good at 3D platforming, what with his short jump and unruly handling. On the other hand, he excels at 2D platforming, since turning becomes a non-issue. The compromise I speak of here is that Sonic Colors relies more heavily on scripted sequences. While you were in control of Sonic most of the time in Unleashed, Colors reins you in for many sections, essentially playing itself for a short time. While this does provide some neat spectacle with no input required by the player, I will admit it's a bit jarring and even unnecessary at times. Still, when it comes to Boost Sonic, I'd take this over Unleashed any day. Of course, we can't forget the colors in Sonic Colors, that being the Wisps, which give Sonic special color powers when collected. There's a few unique Wisps per zone, and when you beat the first level that you encounter one of these, they'll populate previous stages, allowing you to take new paths when you replay them. A lot of these are super cool, such as the Drill Wisp, which allows you to tunnel through the ground, the Cube Wisp, which toggles these blocks, allowing for some interesting puzzles, and the Frenzy Wisp, which turns Sonic into a monster that gets bigger with every enemy or object that it destroys. That said, there's also some not so cool Wisps, though thankfully they're not used nearly as often. My least favorites are the Hover Wisp, which slows the pacing of the level down to a crawl, and the Spike Wisp, which teases you by giving Sonic a spin dash only to take it away when the color power runs out. Sonic Rush proved that the spin dash can coexist with the boost, so I don't understand why this had to be a color power instead of one of Sonic's base moves, but whatever. Despite these few duds, the Wisps overall are a nice addition and offer plenty of opportunities for creative level design that the game more than takes advantage of. There's one more thing to talk about before we move on to the bosses, and that's the world map. Yep, this is the first mainline Sonic game, handhelds notwithstanding, to feature world maps instead of hub worlds. I suppose this streamlines the gameplay, but I have to admit it's a little disappointing after Unleashed, which had loads of interesting hub worlds. But either way, the main thing I want to talk about is how linear these world maps are. Now, Sonic's never been known for non-linear progression, and it's certainly not something I've come to expect from the series, but what this means for Sonic Colors is that you're required to beat every level in the game. This isn't a huge issue, but not all of the levels here are winners, meaning you'll have to sit through at least a few stages that, at best, are on par with those mediocre optional acts in Unleashed. Again, not a huge deal, and most of the worst levels are fairly short, but it just goes to show how much they were struggling to fill this game with substantial content. In fact, Colors is one of the shorter 3D Sonic games, being easily finished in about 4 hours. Am I complaining? No, not really, especially after Heroes, 06, and Unleashed, which were way longer than they had any right to be. However, I do find it weird that we've gone from games that had plenty of content already, only to needlessly pad themselves out anyway, to games that can barely reach a decent length despite the padding. But I've rambled long enough, so now let's move on to the bosses. Like I've said in past videos, classic Sonic bosses set themselves apart from other platformers with a simple design philosophy. There's no limit to how many times you can damage the boss while it's vulnerable, only the amount of time that it is. In my eyes, Sonic Unleashed was the first 3D Sonic game to nail this approach, with previous games fumbling in various areas. How does Sonic Colors fare? Well, for the most part, pretty good. Several of these fights take after the day bosses in Unleashed, having you chase after the boss on a spline and hitting it when you get close enough. Colors further improves on this formula by allowing the player to deal multiple homing attacks before being sent back, and sometimes granting color powers to deal even faster damage. However, this isn't the only type of boss you'll encounter in this game, and the other ones don't follow the classic philosophy nearly as well. One of these, being the first kind you're introduced to, puts Sonic in a circular arena with the boss sitting in the middle, requiring you to either platform or use Wisps to attack. This is a cool idea, and actually takes advantage of Sonic's momentum unlike the main levels, but it's way too easy, only taking 3 hits. The last kind of boss you'll be facing is a bit more complicated, having you platform to a switch that brings you into a large arena where you need to chase after your opponent. This is executed really well, though not under Sonic conventions, seeing as it only allows you to deal hits one at a time. To summarize, Sonic Colors has a few great bosses, a few mediocre bosses, and another few that, while well designed by their own merits, don't meet the criteria of a Sonic boss. Spoiler alert, skip here if you don't want to see him. Thanks to some negligence by his robots early on in the game, Eggman's mind control laser backfires, and now the whole amusement park is set to implode on itself. It's now a race to safety and probably one of the coolest level ideas in the whole series. Terminal Velocity. It's a pretty straightforward level, but the sheer spectacle of Sonic running towards Earth from space is just plain awesome, and a pretty refreshing finale after Unleashed in 06 pretty much just recycled Sonic Adventure's finale with varying degrees of success. Along the way though, Sonic runs into Eggman, who has harnessed the power of the Wisps to build the Nega Wisp Armor, with the sole purpose of destroying Sonic. I guess if he's not going to conquer the world, destroying his arch nemesis is the next best thing, right? This leads us to the final boss, which is also a step up from the previous few games. Eggman's now harnessing the same color powers that you've been using throughout the game, so it's a pretty clever way to turn the formula on its head. The boss itself also doesn't make me want to bash my skull into my brain, so that's a plus. Anyway, after defeating the Wisp Armor, Sonic's still got to get down to Earth, but before he can, the amusement park finally implodes, sucking Sonic in. Thankfully, the Wisps bring him down to safety. Sonic finally gives both them and Tails some actual credit for once, and the credits roll. This is normally where I'd end this section of the video, but I want to take a second to appreciate the fact that they made the credits playable in this game. As far as I know, no other game in the main series ever did this again, and it's a really nice touch. Sonic Colors definitely isn't perfect. The writing leaves a lot to be desired, not all of the levels hit the bullseye, and it certainly lacks content when compared to its predecessors. Not only that, but the game also continues the boost mechanic and leaves behind the rolling mechanics that made Sonic so special in the first place. But that only matters so much when the game also manages to do so many things right. The level design is excellent for the most part, the Wisps are implemented in clever ways, the environments and soundtrack are gorgeous, and while it may not be a perfect Sonic sequel, it is a fantastic follow-up to Sonic Unleashed, fixing a majority of issues that game had. Overall, while it may not be my preferred kind of Sonic game, it's a great game regardless, and it ultimately proved what the boost formula was capable of. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my other Sonic content and subscribe for more video game content just like this. You can also become a member for just $1 per month to get your name in the credits, exclusive emojis, and permanent access to my Discord server. But either way, stay tuned, thanks for watching, and as always, enjoy life.